Good evening and welcome once again to the YouTube channel of Instituto Cervantes, Leeds and Manchester. Tonight we have a new conference debate about bilingualism and the opportunities, but also sometimes the challenge that means a bilingual reality, a bilingual family, or a bilingual individual. Tonight we will have the speech, the conference by Dr. Anik Nandi, Effective Family Language Policies for Galician Language Transmission, Parental Language Management Before and During the Pandemic Lockdown. In this conference, Dr. Nandi will analyze how the reality of bilingualism and the transmission of the Galician language is being implemented in Galicia with some examples and how it was also very much affected by lockdown as every reality. But first of all, I would like to thank you, Julio Villagarcía and Dr. Anik Nandi, for accepting the invitation of Instituto Cervantes. And as you know, most of you, because we have started this series more than 3 years ago, and we are happy to have many people who follow in our audience regularly this program. But this series, has been designed with the support of Dr. Julio Villagarcía, who is lecturer of the University of Manchester and whose fields of research is focused in bilingualism, among other fields of research. The objective of the program is to highlight the positive things and aspects of bilingualism and the fact that, according to the research, there are so many different benefits for children, but also for adults developing bilingualism and for the future, for their career, but also to understand the different cultures. And at the same time, as I said at the beginning, this reality of bilingualism is also has been considered sometimes where what we consider based on a lack of knowledge of how it works, that it could means a difficulty for bilingual children to learn the languages properly or to develop the languages in the same level as monolingual students. Is just an example of the ideas that had been present for a long time and unfortunately haven't been overcome with the help of the academics and researchers. Before I give the floor to Dr. Julio Villagarcía, I will introduce very briefly with his curricula. He is, as I said, senior lecturer at the University of Manchester and currently Maria Zambrano, senior researcher at his alma mater, the University of Oviedo. Dr. Villagarcía, in the course of his PhD at the University of Connecticut, was trained as a theoretical statistician and as a language acquisitionist, working within the framework of minimalism. His current interests lie in the areas of Spanish Romance and English linguistics. Other interests also include child language acquisition, bilingualism, and application of theoretical linguistics research to foreign second language pedagogy. Before I give the floor to Julio, I will remind you that at the end we will have some time, 15 minutes for questions that you can put on the chat, and Julio will read for our guests. And without further ado, I give the floor to Julio. Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Director. Thanks, Anik Nandi, for being here. Thanks, everyone, for your loyalty. I know it's a bad time of the year. Those of you who are academics, you are in the midst of marking exams and so on. So I understand your patience. Well, thank you to those who are watching us, asynchronously online. And let me insist, I'm very honored to be able to witness your loyalty and interest. This is actually the 4th edition of the Bilingualism series, and this is actually the second talk of this 4th edition. The name of the edition, as Pedro anticipated, is the Bilingualism series of the Instituto Cervantes of Manchester and Leeds. Today we'll focus on a topic that has not been explored at length so far in the cycle, in the series, and actually the title of the talk should be self-explanatory: effective family language policies for Galician language transmission, parental language management before and during the pandemic lockdown. So we will be concentrating upon language transmission and the implication this has for bilingualism. It is therefore a pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Anik Nandi. I know my vowels are not the best, but I hope I didn't create any confusion. He's currently Associate Professor of Multicultural Communication in the School of Business at Woxsen University in Telangana, India. He's also a chair there. He's actually the founding director of the Center for Languages and Multicultural Communication, and Joseph Bianco Chair for Language Policy Studies there at his institution in Woxen University. Dr. Nandi received his PhD at Heriot-Watt University, located in Edinburgh, in the UK, back in 2017. So despite his impressive CV, Dr. Nandi is still a relatively young scholar. He's conducted important research projects into intergenerational transmission, in particular in different parts of Spain, namely in the Basque Country and in Galicia, as well as in the Netherlands, more specifically in Leiden. Okay. Anik Nandi is published in prestigious outlets and journals such as Critical Inquiry in Language Studies, Spanish Journal of Applied Linguistics, Multilingual Language Policy, Estudios de Lingüística Gallega, and also Critical Inquiry in Language Studies, which I think I've already mentioned. But numerous journals, very good publications, and a very impressive career in language transmission and language policy. So it's a real honor to have this very, very international researcher talking to us about language transmission during the pandemic, with special attention to Galicia. And without further ado, I will give the floor to Anik. Thank you so much for being here. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by saying muchas gracias, Pedro. It's like, thank you very much for inviting me for this seminar series. I must congratulate Julio for having this seminar series, which happened to be one of the models that many of the Cervantes Institute should connect to, because this is not about only Spanish, it's about Spanish in contact with other languages as well. So this is a kind of a discourse that we are already having in the Indian context as well, because we are a multilingual country. So to begin with, I really congratulate you, Pedro, as well, for keeping this thing on. So this is really good and important. I would like to thank all of our colleagues here for joining us, and particularly my simultaneous translator, Jose Blasquez. I think you are also there, connected. With your permission, I'll just start, because I know that it might be a bit late otherwise for many other colleagues. So I'll just share the slides first. And you know that those who are familiar with my work, they quite well know that I mostly work in the sector of critical sociolinguistics, linked to mostly with critical language policy. So to begin with, I'll start very clearly with the aims and objectives I have for this talk, which might be a bit extended. I will connect to, Julio has mentioned quite a few articles that I have written, but there's a recent work that came through like only last month. Is my first journal spatial issue in sociolinguistic studies as like guest editor, so that there will be certain areas that will be some overlapping context and topics that I'll be discussing there. So it will need some baseline for the theoretical aspects of how I understand critical family language policy, and whether it can be termed that way or not. That would be the part of the discussion at the end of this talk. So the idea would be to understand the dynamics of minority language speaking families, their grassroots level practices in the home and in the community to either to maintain or revive their languages. So which is more broadly spoken that Galician context should be connected to other contexts as well. So I will appreciate if you have any questions regarding this, or discussion or comments. I will be very much interested to know how it has some repercussion. That's the reason there will be a focus on the theoretical aspects related to it, to ascertain the role of governmental policies in the process, and also the connection, the intersection between governmental policies and grassroots policies I'm talking about here. And this will be explored through the lens of language policy. So language policy, that most of the talks in the seminar series, as Julio already mentioned very clearly, that had a very strong psycholinguistic focus, if I'm not wrong. So it's like I've seen some of them, they have got aspects of sociolinguistics, but possibly not that strongly related to language policy as such. So whenever I organize, let's say, a workshop about language policy or anything of that topic, the first thing that I ask the audience that what do you really think when you think about the word language policy? Close your eyes, think about that thing, whatever this concept is in your mind. If you start thinking about that, the most common answer that I normally get from the audience is something that is feasible, that you can hold either in the form of a book or a dossier, or maybe a PDF that you can download from the governmental website or something, which in some way is obviously true, but at the same time, I understand language policy from a broader perspective, which I see from somehow I saw that Bernard Polsky, the father figure in our field, who started this field in a sense since early 2000, as a extension of applied linguistics. Obviously, language policy existed before that. Since 1950s onwards, we have seen the development of language policy as a field. But what I'm saying that the notion was pretty much in that previous era was very much on top-down aspects. So the broader perspective of language policy came in the later ages, like as Polsky reconnects here with the language policy as any decision or choice made about languages by certain actors, such as the state, community, and individual, based on certain criteria such as efficacy or symbolic value. So we can start from that part, like when we talk about any decision or choices. So this leads me to the next level of understanding, which is what are the governmental language policy is, and what kind of sociolinguistic inequality it can drive in. So when governmental language policy, in my understanding or in critical research related to language policy, we would say that it's a profoundly political project where various interest groups work to advance their defend or competing language ideologies. I mean, if we just see it beyond the bilingual, multilingual context, we see that there are many interest groups. Among the multilingual context, let's say in the context of India, there are several tribal languages. So there may be some more dominant tribal languages. They create a sub-hierarchy, a meta-hegemony inside the same, these languages. So this is pretty much, sometimes it depends more of the political project. I will say that how it enacts in certain contexts. Policymakers tend to endorse the interest of the dominant social groups, often marginalize the minority languages in the process. These policymakers normally employ a range of policy devices that we know, such as education, mass media, to influence people's linguistic practices and choices. Let's say that education may be one of the most strongest domains that we can think about to determine or to implement certain policies that will end up changing people's linguistic ideas and ideologies. Sometimes it may not be the language or the language education at all, because this is also another aspect, because sometimes you will try to find a language policy somewhere and you cannot find it in the documents. So there may be a policy or more clauses pertaining the language issues in other areas. Let's say the case of language policy in England, if we were to talk about it. I have time for that, maybe for the discussion era. So this leads me to the policies of different types. One of the policies that I have been working for a while in different contexts is known as the low intensity policy, on which I have written very extensively, in a sense, in the article that Julio mentioned, published last year in Critical Issues in Language Studies, where I talked about this specific type of policy, when then very needed to understand and analyze the Galician language policy coming from the state government. So the institutional policies with hidden agendas is a very particular idea that I talk about, because sometimes policymakers intentionally want the policies to be implemented partly or have planned it in a way so it will be never be executed. Maybe too ambitious policies, just like the national education policy 2020 in India. I can discuss about that for the questions as well if you have more queries regarding this. And introduced with an intention. These policies are normally introduced with an intention to maintain the status quo of a non-conflictive coexistence between dominant and non-dominant languages in the society. So they may create some impact, definitely, we have seen that, because if you have put a language policy in practice for a while, it might have always an impact. May create a negligible impact on the actual language practices on the ground. This is what is the whole story all about. So these lukewarm policies, which are kind of non-conflictive kind of policies used in favor of, always been used in favor of the majority language speakers, that we have also seen according to the studies already published. So the language policies on the ground, that is where we will be working or looking at today, like how bilingual actors are actually implementing those policies or not. So these actors, we talk about the people who represent the human agency, the parents, teachers, students, and all of us, like in a way, we are connected through language policies one way or the other regarding the languages we speak in a specific context. So these actors for whom the language policy is developed is designed to play a significant role in the interpretation of the policies of the government, which is coming from the top, let's say, in a sense. So these actors, if they are disillusioned with the governmental policies, may create their own language agenda and may resist from the ground. So these discourses of resistance is something that I looked at. I will come back to my own project on the Galician context and throughout the presentation. So the formulation of this, like, autochthonous language agenda may take a form within the family, sometimes inside the classroom, or maybe at the community level. We have seen similar kind of scenarios, let's say the case of the Icastolas when during the Franco regime. So how these the school level policies developed from to develop a bottom up resistance towards the top down policies of that time. So this is something that I'm telling you that is more about explaining or understanding the family, how I understand it from a critical social linguistic perspective. So I understand family or analyze family as a form of a policy regime. So regime is a set of rules that the regime is something that exists in governance studies and public policy studies, where we understand set of rules and norms regulating the relations between the government and its subjects, which means all of us. So each family, if we see it as a form of governance, as a place of governance, is a community of practice. It has its own norms of speaking, acting, behaving, and believing. I assume many of you would be looking at right now in their own private experiences in terms of family relations. You will see that maybe these are the things that you will see, that the meticulous principles, rules, and regulations that govern the family's inner life, the range of daily activities that they organize by the parents as in form of care, because sometimes they can be their parents or maybe some extended family members or maybe sometimes elder brothers or sisters. They also create a different kind of a scenario, certain form of rules that will develop some form of apprenticeship and acquisition of aptitudes for the children, which sees the family in form of a policy regime. So this is pretty much the concept that we worked in my special issue that I mentioned before. So this is pretty much my understanding how I see that how language policies are framed within the context of family. This is very important to understand that how I will be analyzing the Galician context. So as bilinguals, as researcher of bilingualism, you all know that there are different aspects of it that needs to be taken into consideration. That may be the sociolinguistic concept, like let's say the context where more than one language is spoken or not, socio-cultural context where you will see that whether some languages will have a better value in a sense, more capital and all that. So that is also another aspect of it. Some more economic capital, socio-economic scenario would be important for that. Socio-political context would be important as well. So then there you have this whole idea of language socialization. Then you have this idea of parental knowledge of bilingualism, language of parents, parental background, home literacy environment. And then in the core of it, there are the very three important domains that Spolsky has mentioned in the very beginning. This is language ideology, language management, intervention would be taking place in the context of language practice, because sometimes the difference between language management and practice will be blurred because of the connection, because most of them are very much, many parents will intervene in different moments to correct their children. So that's the point of intervention is there. So what I analyzed in different other contexts are different forms of power relations that they have inside the home. So this is a kind of a furtherance of the model that Cruz Christensen already created in 2014, I also added my own interpretation and work to it. So the family capitals are very important in this process when this language, obviously the process starts with the language ideology because that is the background for any policy. And then you will see that family capitals are very important in this process, whether they will decide which language to plan, which language to speak at home. So these are the areas which will be taken into consideration in the process. Then we have the social network of the parents, like how and with whom they connect. So that is also very important. And also one of the very important things, being an Indian, uh, like for a person, I can see the parental expectations. Sometimes parental expectations are way higher, what they expect their children to speak and talk about. So there are different kind of FLP models. Many of these FLP models in bilingual context, we are very well known as one parent, one language policy. But beyond that, there are also different kind of models. We can talk about that afterwards. And also the parental input is also very, very important, that how much these children are exposed to that language inside the home domain. All these have their own roles when the ultimate output of the thing of language practice comes into being. So Galicia is a case study in multilingual Spain. I know that many of my colleagues would very much familiar with the multilingualism that exists in Spain, but still I'm just giving a quick recap to it. Spain's transition to democracy in the early 80s led to the new legal framework for its regional minority languages, which I'll be calling as RML in a short form, in an abbreviation format. So this new constitutional right conferred diverse degree of co-officiality, as we all know, to the regional minority languages alongside Spanish. Obviously, Spanish on the top always. So there, that can be the case of the Catalonia, Galicia, or in the Basque country. But Castilian continue to retain a greater degree of prestige and social capital in several forms in Spain compared to the other regional minority languages, even after decades of language planning activities. So in some context, this low intensity language policy perspective coming in, I will talking about this. So pretty much to understand how it is, in my understanding, I wanted to develop a kind of a framework for myself when I started doing the work. So I think Julio might have something to comment on it, whether how we understand the notion of like the Asturian as a recognized language. I don't know whether the situation got changed or not in between, because I'm talking about the time of my research that took place in 2012 to 16, that point of time. So this is a framework that I decided that point of time. So like Spanish on the top, co-official languages, recognized languages, indigenous, unofficial languages and varieties, and then the migrant languages. There is a book, edited volume, I think, about the Romance languages, edited by my former like PhD, postdoc supervisor, with Wendy Bennett and Janice Carruthers from from the Queen's University Belfast. They wrote that edited volume. There I found this article by one of our very famous, well-known sociolinguists from Galicia, Dr. Fernando Ramallo. He talked about this model, but I framed it in my own understanding. So that's what I'm just wanted to share this one with you. So Galician, a brief overview, if you see it, that it is alongside Castilian, the co-official language of Galicia, approximately 3 million people speak the language. If you see the sociolinguistic milieu of Galicia, you know that in Galicia, the interaction between the social and symbolic capital is manifested through this prestige afforded to Castilian, which was even before, like, you know, that like after the Dark Era and all that, the Castilian was already the dominant language in the cities of Galicia. Last 30 years of language policy, I mean, now it is nearly 40 years of the policies that we are talking about, remain mostly anodyne, which is like more on the like kind of a non-interventionist kind of an approach, which a minimum implementation on the ground. So which means that there is a policy in paper that talks about very good things, that we are going to do this and that, will reach becoming bilinguals and all that. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the implementation of that policy, the government decided to take a blind eye on that, because they didn't want to go ahead and do the implementation on the ground as they have maintained, because most of it is always in paper, most of the cases. So we just like to create it more of a further to this, that happened that in 2010 a decree of bilingualism was created, by the current government, because this decree is still on. You can see that the preschools ensured a medium of instruction to be the home language of the children, and the majority of children in the urban context speak already is Spanish at home. So it's like at the end of the day, it automatically becomes the language of instruction in urban schools, which is somehow reducing the space of Galician in urban, semi-urban domains of Galicia. So the number of adolescents who never spoke Galician has increased by 17% in 2018, and 35% of Castilian-speaking students finished their obligatory schooling without an adequate competence in Galician. So there are a lot of reports regarding this. You can have a look at Real Academia Gallega's report, or I'm a part of that, one of those books that we can talk about this afterwards as well. We have pointed this out, that there is a, even if not direct, but there is a kind of indirect influence of these policies in place on the current language use of the youth in Galicia. Instead of language shift, which is also very prominent here, you can say that the percentage of population that usually speaking the language, you can see that only Galician is only those people who are in 65 and over. More Galician than Spanish is showing, you can say only Spanish is gone higher in the 5 to 14, and you can also see there is a continuous increase in that group. And 15 to 29, there is also a kind of a more of a polarization aspects are also can be seen. This is like the household survey structure survey by IGE, which is like Instituto Gallego de Estadística. So the main research questions that I want to treat here is today that do the Galician parents create visible or invisible language policies at individual or in the family domain? If yes, what kind of strategies do they use individually or collectively to contest the linguistic governance of Castilian in the Galician society? What are the factors that are responsible or for success or failure of these strategies? So these are three main areas I'll be focusing on throughout the presentation. Since I'm an ethnographer, I'm a scholar of linguistic anthropology, it's important to understand the researcher as well. So that's like, this is more or less to get to know about my own work, how I am integrated with the community. So I stayed in Galicia in different moments. First, I came there for a master's, a DEA as they call it. So I did my DEA over there, like my MPhil equivalent kind of a study. Then it was between 28 to 10, and then I had another 2 years as project with Institute of Galician Language. Then between 2016 to 17, I stayed there as well, 20 to 21 as well. So I have a B2 level of Galician. And then I also hold a TV program in Galicia during 2011 and 12, which gave me an idea that I met different parts of like people from very different backgrounds in Galicia. Some of these you can find it in the YouTube as well. So there are also like grassroots level language activism. I was very involved to that, like the importance of speaking the language. I organized several events. I spoke in different places. So these are the kind of some of the pictures you have. It really developed a kind of a media exposure for me, which also helped me in certain ways to get kind of an access in a sense. How to I got the parents actually. So we'll talk about this afterwards. So ethnographic data collection took place in two phases, because one of the pre-pandemic era when I was doing my PhD, so it was mostly focused on field notes and observations. I had 18 in-depth semi-structured interviews with individual parents, 9 families to be precise, 2 focus group discussions with 4 families each, and when all this interview and observational data was transcribed and analyzed or in certain way or the other, I started actually working on that how to So what I was saying actually that I had a kind of an audit, which is kind of to make sure that parents or whoever is being interviewed is saying something that they do this kind of language practices, and whether this is really happening or not inside the home, just in a way to validate their claims that what they're really doing. So one of these interesting perspectives of this audit was that I was asking the parents first to follow become their proxy observers of their own children. So I asked the parents whom I interviewed first, I said that why don't you observe your children for a week and write a diary, let's say kind of a to understand the language input, which is a very common study in the field of bilingualism. Many of our fellow scholars would know about that. And then I asked them that just to comply with those details that was used in that, like in that diary thing, then I just wanted them to like kind of a recording of 10 minutes maximum, kind of a conversation in certain kind of activities. So this is one of those examples of it. Where I'm talking about like a parents here are having dinner with both their children and how they interact with each other. So like that is something that I want you to have a quick look at it, which is useful, I think.
Te explico. Hoy vamos a grabar un poquillo con la CEA, porque sabes que otro día un rapaz llamó a mami os explicó que estaba haciendo un trabajo, hicieron unas entrevistas.
¿Qué pasó?
Yo estoy explicando.
¿Qué pasa? Que no me acuerdo lo que...
Mamá, llamaron por teléfono cuando iba de esa música otro día. Era Anik. Un rapaz.
Just a short thing to intervene. I hope that many of you already know Spanish. I'm just telling that the father claims that he speaks Galician. Mom is a Spanish speaker. The elder daughter, who the father says that speaks Galician to him, and at the same time, the youngest child, who is of like, let's say 3 years or something, he is just like, he doesn't speak a single word of Galician in any conversation.
Te explico. Hoy vamos a grabar un poquillo con la CEA, porque sabes que otro día un rapaz llamó a mami os explicó que estaba haciendo un trabajo, hicieron unas entrevistas.
¿Qué pasó?
Yo estoy explicando.
¿Qué pasa? Que no me acuerdo lo que...
Mamá, llamaron por teléfono cuando iba de esa música otro día. Era Anik. Un rapaz que hicieron unas entrevistas, que estaba haciendo un trabajo y necesitaba que grabáramos 10 minutos ahora en la CEA para ver cómo se paran a nuestra casa. Vale. Entonces, pues bueno, vamos a grabar 3 minutos. Gracias. Contamos algo muy malo. ¿Cómo está la pizza?
Es mejor no avisar. Porque estamos todos.
¿Ya estás grabando?
Sí.
Esto.
Vale, eso no será un poquito grande.
Lo cortamos.
Hola. Cacho en medio. Espera, voy a buscar para cortar.
¿Ya te lo quieres que te corte?
No.
¿Y que te puso una persona que te da esto especial?
No,
No.
es por ejemplo otro, uno que no tenga champiñones.
So this is the moment just wanted to share with you that you saw that the conversation was taking place in a non-conflictive manner, in a sense that the daughter was started she started actually speaking in Galician when the father was there in the table. As soon as the man leaves the table to let's say to find a knife or something, she starts a conversation with the Spanish-speaking mom, who is also Galician, grew up in Galician household and by speaking Spanish. This little girl actually shifts to Spanish and never comes back to Galician anymore. So this is pretty much the power of Spanish in the Galician society, pretty much explained in several ways. So we can talk about this afterwards maybe. So what I'm talking about during the lockdown period, one of the things that I found during my research, many parents complained that they didn't have sufficient time, although they want to implement a pro-Galician policy for their children, but they didn't have a chance actually to implement it because most of the time the children are spending more time outside than with parents. So I thought it's a very interesting time to see and go back to my field notes and people whom I can ask, let's say that what is the situation during the pandemic lockdown. So I took conducted these interviews virtually, and this is during the pandemic lockdown of 2020-21. So like 4 focus group discussions I organized with 3 to 7 parents each. So I talked to those parents, what is your experience during this time of pandemic? Because everybody is staying at home now. So this is something that we can talk about in the data. So before the pandemic lockdown. So one of the strategies that I found that is a form of parental language governance, or creating a kind of a regime for them. Let's talk about the case of Bea. She says that they have actually made a WhatsApp group, which in Telegram, and this group is actually like, since they just want to control in a way that the socialization process of the child. So which in a sense that they send their kid to a Galician medium immersion school, and after that they also meet with children who speak the Galician language, which means that because there is a common like a scenario in the Galician urban semi-urban society, that many of the children, if they speak Galician, so they maybe get ridiculed. So to avoid the scenario, these are the parents. I'm not saying that this is a good or bad thing, please note that, because it's not about good parenting or bad parenting. I'm only documenting what is going on over there. So these are the kind of like, since they have chosen a Galician medium school, they also want to maintain retain the culture of Galician speaking culture inside the home, as well as with their children's peers. So this is something kind of trying to control the ambience outside as well, the environment. Also, I have seen parents creating different kind of breathing spaces. That was during pretty much during the pandemic as well, the strategy that they have. Like I have seen many parents who are like kind of new speakers of the Galician language took part in these kind of events, which was very important as well to maintain the language at home and beyond. And so another thing was crowdfunding to developing Galician medium schools. I can share you one of those things that is a snapshot taken from a web page that was called Projecto Moas, because these are the parents, they found a place, they wanted to grow a Galician medium school. They have targeted 160,000 euros to get, and they have received even much more than that, which shows there is a grassroots level demand on it as well. So which ended up like this like semente schools, which can be translated as seeds. I think our many of our colleagues, like from Harriet Watt, like now in the University of Glasgow, Professor Bernie O'Rourke has done extensive research on these groups. Actually, a part of mine was as well related to it. So kindergartens, we can see that now they have self-funded kindergarten schools in Coruña, Lugo, Vigo, and Orense, some kindergarten and primary schools in Santiago and Trasancos. There's a like kind of a exterior of Santiago de Compostela. They also do a lot of these parents actually are, some of these group of parents are very active and on the ground, and they do a lot of cultural activism and social presence they develop for Galician. This is pretty much bottom up how they are developing this. They talk about like empowering language, the Galician language, and this role of the Semente group has been very active on that. Some of these practices involve traditional dancing and all that. So it's pretty much bottom up, as you can say. Another very interesting strategy that came also from the group of people who are coming from this bottom-up perspective, many of them are also parents or maybe more influenced through the Galician language maintenance or revitalization strategies. They have developed this Neofalantes.gal, which is more related to new speakers of the Galician language. Many of these parents are new speakers whom I have like interviewed. In a way, those who are like not very familiar with the terminology, it's a very common terminology in the context of European minority language scenarios, which refers to people who did not learn the language at home because there was a rupture of intergenerational transmission as it took place in Basque Country or in Galicia or in Catalonia. But these are the people who actually learned the language in the school, and now they use the language in various degrees. So this is pretty much a kind of a common space. We talk about many people who share their histories and talk about a common way to heal these these efforts that we're talking about. So during the pandemic lockdown in Galicia, I conducted the research more or less in the middle and the last part of it. So my intention was to study simply to see kind of a follow-up data to understand what was the impact of the pandemic lockdown on children's early language socialization, because many of the parents and also my studies suggested that As soon as these Galician speaking children go out from home and go to the school, the first thing, the peer pressure that made them change the language. Many cases, they shift to Spanish and never come back. So this is the kind of a scenario we're talking. So my intention was to see how things were. So very interesting point of view from Santiago from Saking, who said that since his child's social life was reduced, he spent more time with the parents. Now he speaks better Galician. So you can see this purism perspective is also there from the parents, that they want to make the Galician in a very more pure form, as they were spoken by, this whole idea of like authentic Galician. Then we have the case of Natalia, who is a Coruña, who is, just to note that Coruña is one of the regions of Galicia where only 1% of the schoolgoers speak Galician. It's a very harsh context for the Galician language. So Natalia is a mom. She is sharing her idea that, her experience, where she talked about like her children are now speaking 100% in Galician, because her youngest was fully shifted to Galician again, because that boy was like, when she said in some other place, I even have an email from her from that side. So she said that this boy fully shifted to Galician again. And it was the most positive thing for her during the lockdown. I mean, this was a kind of a claim that she sent over there through an email as well afterwards. Martin told me that basically a similar kind of a situation in his home in Marin, which is also a small town near Pontevedra, very closely connected to the urban, semi-urban perspective that I talked about. I mean that as a consequence of this lockdown, the children started speaking more and more Galician as well. Focus group 2, I can give you some other examples of similar kind. Mara Mom from San Chencho she said that the use of Galician received an impetus in their home since the lockdown time. They have started responding in Galician, because earlier what happened, that although the parents used to speak in Galician, talk to the children in Galician, normally they used to respond back in Spanish. Situation changed. So she is happy that the situation changed that way. So they started responding to him in the minority language that they have been planning for a while. So Ines is another case who we speak Galician at home. My son's teacher recently told me that he's the only one of the few students in the school who speaks Galician now. So this is the case in Santiago. And then you have the case of Betanzos, which is also a place near La Coruña. A Coruña in that case, like Surso. He said that my son used more Galician because he stayed with my parents who are the Galician speaking. So my son uses the Galician, localized Galician expressions that even surprises him. So this is pretty much the scenario that we talked about. The very last slide I'm talking about, the Castilian, still remains a greater degree of symbolic value in the urban Galicia, and the primary language of socialization among children remains in very, it's kind of a norm in that context, that they will continue to speak Spanish in their socialization context, which somehow is creating kind of fluctuations and inconsistencies in desired language practices of the Galician-speaking parents. So this is pretty much the overall scenario. In a community such as Galicia, where the existence of these Orthodox native speakers, 65 plus, I'm talking about strings, not anymore, either they are dying out or then there is a language shift for the younger generation. These pro-Galician parents can occupy a very important role in language revitalization processes from ground up. Pandemic lockdown period helped them to a certain extent to implement their family language policies, because as I have said, in the previous study, I found that many of these parents pointed out that they didn't have sufficient time to spend with their children to implement the pro-Galician family language policies they have planned. But somehow the situation changed with time during the pandemic, although short in period, but at that point of time, they had the chance to implement their pro-Galician policies. However, it still remains to be ascertained whether these parents will restore the process of intergenerational transmission of Galician language in the home domain and within the community, and that can in turn create new generations of speakers. So this is the place, some publication details. If you're interested, you will find most of my work online. If you need something, I will share it with you as well. Gracias y si hay preguntas.
Thank you very much, Anik. Very interesting. A lot of very useful information. I'm sure our guests, our attendees tonight will be impressed with so much work behind this. And let's see if there are any questions. If anybody would like to just unmute themselves or write the question in the chat, we will be very happy to relay the information to our distinguished speaker. We can give people a few seconds. Maybe we can break the ice. Anik, there's a question. Imagine you don't know anything about the topic. I know it's impossible, okay? It's a strange empathy exercise. Which question would you ask yourself if you didn't know anything about the topic?
I would really ask that what happened afterwards, because this is the kind of a study that I ended over there. Then I moved on to my Juan de la Cierva, which was more focused on the Basque context. Somehow I had this part, like what happened with it. You know that, Julio, that I don't know how much you see me as an Indian, but I have always seen me, a part of mine was always Galician. So it's like it remained. I mean, that same way. The funny part of it that the former president of Real Academia Gallega used to call me Ben Galego because I'm Bengali. So it's like Ben and Galego. So it's like that is a kind of a responsibility you have as a researcher. So the ethical responsibility is on his side, but I would always wanted to know what happened afterwards. I have talked to some folks, my friends and colleagues, but many of them suggested me that the situation was the same like before, because that as a temporary change that took place during the pandemic times because of the lockdown. So one way or the other, we once again need to see it from a more language socialization perspective. And I assume I have my colleague here, Ana Maria Relanio Pastor, I think I can share here, like she has worked extensively in language socialization. So this is one of those areas that we can see that there is a lot of work to be done, because language policy from the top has always been seen as something that should be done only for the education. I mean, it's a kind of a common belief that policy has been always drained towards the education system. But there is way beyond things, beyond the education system, which is no doubt very important. We all know that. But at the same time, we need to see now beyond the education system how we can plan the language so that we can make it more effective for minority language revitalization. And once this whole process is done, we will see that there is also this whole notion of bilingual brain and all these things. And I know that in Vigo now we have this center that Maria del Carmen has created, that Vigo bilingual and all that. That more related to the areas of bilingualism research from psycholinguistic perspective. I mean, we need more of these actually, instead of like doing all those documentational stuff that has been going for ages, like very descriptive work. We need to be more critical. That is what something I talked about, because that when we talk about in certain context of Spanish academia, I can see that Ana Maria left a message quickly, I think. So she has to leave, I think. Unfortunately, I have to go and all that. So the thing is that I can see that the development needs to take place towards critical analysis of how these policies have been used until now. Very little information is taken care of, in a sense that going beyond this education professionals, because children were not only learning the language or adapting to the language when they're going to the school. There are after school clubs, preschool clubs, there are like trabajos de tiempo libre, like actividades de tiempo libre, where somehow these like children find a kind of a model, or let's say a kind of a person, let's say un monitor can be a model. So for them, in terms of language, sometimes parents may say many things. And I think that, Pedro, you can ask Oscar. We have extensive discussions regarding this of you, because he has been an avid Catalan speaker, always a protector of Catalan language. Wherever he was, he said the same kind of issues that he found in his own context, like how children are leaving their own original tongue and they would be more interested in English than in Spanish itself in certain contexts. I think Ana Maria has researched about that as well. So yeah, there are a lot of things we can talk about.
I have a question.
Enthusiasm. Oh yeah, Pedro, sorry. And then we have Maria.
Sorry. Is that you have been researching also in the Basque language, no, in the País Vasco in Spain, about the
Yes.
bilingualism and the reality. Are there parallels how the Basque and the Galician have evolved with the different policies that have been implemented regarding the language, the bilingual reality in both regions?
Thank you, Pedro. This is a very tricky question to answer to begin with, because we cannot compare apples with pears.
Yeah.
Because in terms of that, thank you, Maria. I think you just said the word. So the thing is that we need to understand very in the beginning what is the history of the development of those languages, or that those language policies, in a sense. Basque context represent a more positive policy until the implementation on the ground as well. So that is a different storyline altogether. If you ask me, what is my understanding of putting both the data when I have them at hand, I see that activism that is very common. Actually, Galicia is as if following the activism that it used to be in Basque country, let's say years back. You will see that they are sending people, this Semente group, sending people directly to the Ikastolas to learn their form of learning and how they have adapted to it. Because there is like the closeness, linguistic closeness between Spanish and Galician also play a very important role, which is not the case with the Basque language, if you see it, because they're very visibly different language. So, structurally very different. So it's like their development is different on that side. Another thing I find, if you ask me, and I will just, this is a very personal opinion, I didn't have a chance to go through my data and all that. I hope that next year in San Sebastian in ISB, I'll be having one of my papers that will be focused on my comparative understanding of the Galician and Basque parents. So I can suggest that Basque parents are kindly in a situation of a crossroads right now, because the dominant discourse that I found in my 4 or 5 different focus groups with parents in Basque country is that the activism part is done. We are now safe in a kind of a thing. But at the same time, that the challenge is now not with Spanish anymore. It's the challenge is with English. Because I found 3 or 4 parents, they have decided to take up English as a dominant language at home, which was very surprising for me to see that. Because sometimes we have some preconceived understanding about family language policy that it should be pro-Basque. But no, somehow you see that instead of going for Spanish, there were more pro-English understanding inside the home. So there are factors that you need to see that need to be compared. But the comparison need to be on different grounds, because we cannot just compare, because the development has been very different. Like the policy structure, the policy implementation and all that. I hope that I tried to respond to it, but we cannot really respond to it like in a single word, as you know that the complexities are there.
No, este es un tema muy interesante, pero complejo. It's a very interesting topic, but complex. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Any other questions from the audience? Anybody who would like to unmute themselves for maybe 1 or 2 last questions? There's still some time. We want to release Anik soon, because obviously, you know, it's late, but there is still a question by Marco Antonio Espinosa. Considering that the pandemic was an exceptional period, can what we have learned from that period in these families be of use to project sustainable flips in normal times? I'm not sure what.
He means like family language policies in normal times.
Oh, sorry. I've never been very good at acronym. Sorry about that.
No, please don't be. If you start speaking about bilingualism stuff, we might be falling apart as well. So this is, yes, actually the whole notion of being sustainable FLP is not that like assured, you know, that I always believe that it needs to be contextual, it needs to be situational. Each and every single family is a different space. So as each and every individual. So the thing is that we need to understand that all this, you remember that circle that I talked about in the very beginning of the, like how I understand it. So you need to understand that each and every family interprets all these external features in their own way. Because if their access to capitals is not the same, like someone who can send their children for a specific school to be taught specific languages may have a different kind of a family language policy. That is what I refer to. I hope this is something that responds to his idea. But Marco, we have a lot to discuss about sustainable FLPs. There's a new terminology that you brought in. I would love to go back to this topic again with you.
Good. Good. So unless there are questions in the next 5 seconds, so please write them in the chat or unmute yourselves. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'll give the floor to our director, Pedro Eusebio.
Thank you, Julio. Thank you very much, Dr. Anik Nandi. It was very, very interesting, and we learn in each event how important it is to support bilingualism and to know all the benefits that it has. So thank you very much, and thank you especially to Dr. Anik for this Center of Galician Studies that you are opening, the first one in Asia, is something of a very, very important transcendence for all of us. So thank you, and thank you to our audience, and see you, all of you, in the next event of bilingualism. Hasta pronto.
Hasta pronto.